Hi, my name is Benedict for Higher Hertz. This video is slightly different from the last few in the sense that those last few have been a review about a specific product with some talk about how the world works around them. This one is a little broader, but it's a subject that I think is actually a very good one. It's what is a VST? In particular, the whole concept of what a plugin is, the advantages it brings, and of course the disadvantages that come with it as well, because everything's got a swings and roundabouts to it, and if we only look at one side, we can actually get caught by the other side, by the downside. As you saw me in the Reaper review, get caught by the downside that I find with using that door. Broadly, what is a plugin? Most commonly referred to as VST, but very commonly referred to equally as plugins. Now, plugins actually the right term because what they are is a little bit of helper code in the form of a DLL. Now, DLL is computer coding thingy for a little helper program. So it's like a program or an app that runs inside another program. And we'll get to that a little bit later in that how you use a plugin or a VST. Exactly where the protocol or the idea started, I don't know, but it definitely got famous through Photoshop. In the sort of mid to late 90s, suddenly Photoshop had these plugins, Kai's Goo, and you could make people do all kinds of funny, kooky things. And then that was carried across to audio. Started with Steinberg, the people behind Cubase. They invented a format that they opened up. Now, the format works through an SDK, which is a software development kit, and it's a protocol that to make a device that works within the VST format, you must follow the protocols of the software development kit. That makes it both easy and hard, because it means that, yes, there's a structure you have to follow, which kind of makes it easier, and there are times where that structure can be frustrating for the developer because they want to do something different. And as we'll see in the pros and cons of the VST platform, there have been some issues around that. Now, when you come to getting a plugin and downloading it, you might well suddenly find yourself a little confused, because there are actually many competing formats. Some of them are still VST, some of them are not VST at all. The common things that you'll see on screen here are VST2, a VST3, an AAX, and various versions of that, 32 and 64-bit. The common other things that you will encounter will be an AU, which is an Apple-specific plugin type, because unless your VST is designed specifically to work on a Mac, it'll only work on Windows. You'll also find an RE or a rack extension, which is a Reason Studio specific format. You'll get to see one a little bit later. And in the last review with Reaper, I spoke about JS or JSonic, which is another kind of plugin. It's a script that runs inside, which is essentially another kind of a DLL, helper file. When you find a plugin that you think, oh, I like the look of what that does, make sure that you understand what kind of plugin you need. If you're on Apple, then you might need an AU. If you're running Pro Tools, then chances are you need an AAX, because a VST doesn't natively work there. You will also need to look at whether you need a 32-bit plugin, a 64-bit plugin, a VST2 or a VST3, because they are different from one another. We'll discuss that a little bit more later, but when you come to do the install, you'll commonly be asked. You will also find sometimes when you download a plugin, and personally I actually really like this, especially with freeware, shareware style plugins, is that often you will just open the folder, find a couple of files, and your loose DLL lying around. And some of them, I can't see one here, but some of them will have like gclip 64.dll, and that tells you that's a 64-bit version. Now that's the version I'm going to drag in because my host is a 64-bit host, requires a 64-bit plugin, otherwise it won't recognize it. So just be aware there are some competing protocols, and we are in a transition format between 32-bit and 64-bit, and now into VST 3. The next question you're probably going to ask is, where do I get one of these things? Now, there are lots of places. Once you start looking, you'll find VST all over the place. There's one place to start your search. It is KVR Audio. KVR Audio have become the center for basically everything that happens in plugins for audio. So very simply speaking, if it's happening, it should be on KVR somewhere. There is a big database that you can go searching in. That comes under here. I'm not going to show you. You can work this out for yourself. It's basically using a computer. But KVR Audio is the great place to start. We might start to look at the overview of what's good and what's bad about plugins. What's good is that they are a very versatile, standardized format, meaning that a properly built VST will work equally anywhere, so long as it's the appropriate style format, then it will work in any device, in any situation. That's a great thing. That's that software development kit. You obey the rules, it will work everywhere. That's good. There are now a huge range of available plugins. Anything you want to do, chances are you can find 50 plugins that do that. Many of them will do it the same way, but one or two of them will have a workflow improvement or something like that make it work nicely for you. The VST environment is generally a very vibrant marketplace that has encouraged innovation. KVR themselves have encouraged innovation with their annual competition where any developer can make a plugin that they give away for free that people then vote on. And there's a certain cachet in being able to say, hey, I won KVR's Reader's Choice Award. It brings a lot of traffic in. And so they're the goods of the platform, but the bads of the platform do need to be discussed. Some developers have been loose with the SDK protocol. This is more of a past issue, but still crops up. It leads to crashes or incompatibility inside some doors. So you'll find a plugin works in one door, but won't work in another. Like at the moment, I've got an issue with Stephen Slate's free drum module. That he works fine in Reaper, because you just saw me using it in Reaper, but when I open it up in Reason, the DLL runs, but then it won't find the actual drum samples. Why that is, I don't know, but some developers, particularly in the past, as I say, tended to be very fast and loose with the SDK. They would use any, hack that they could to get what they wanted, rather than thinking what's going to work reliably. So you will encounter a certain amount of crashfulness, and many doors have developed protocols like sandboxing plugins, so that when you hit a plugin that goes down, because you will, that it won't take the whole project down with it. It'll just crash in place. You'll get a warning saying, this VST just died. Save your project, pull it out, solve the problem. Next big problem is that some developers have also gotten a little bit loose with, shall we say, the truth about what their device really does. I tried a device yesterday that was a saturator. Sounded nice. Matter of fact, sounded amazing. Plugged it in, turned it on. It's like, whoa, how good is this? What have I been missing out on? Being rational and having encountered this before, I had a look, and what their plugin was doing was actually good. It was a nice saturator. It sounded nice, but they were adding roughly 3 dB to the signal. So even though they had a switch that says keep the levels pretty well even, they had defaulted that switch to off, added a pile of drive, and so of course You turn that plugin on, suddenly it's like, wow, so much better. But it's not so much better from the saturation, it's just so much better because it's so much louder. So there is a lot of furphying about what's really going on. This is a downside of a saturated market, where you'll find a lot of manufacturers will use, well, any edge they can find to try to get ahead. That turns me off. There are reasons why those sorts of things happen, but there are also reasons why those things are avoidable and shouldn't happen. So just be cautious that some of the promises you're going to encounter are not entirely legitimate, which is very related to the last point that I've got, that it's an incredibly cluttered marketplace, as I've said, and there is a lot of what I'll call Me Too garbage. As in, oh, well, this style of plugin is very popular right now, I better make one that looks and does that thing. Not because I feel like I've got a significant thing to add to the canon of pluginism, or some way to make it work better. I just need to have something that's the same as what everybody else has got, because otherwise I might lose. So it fills the marketplace with tons and tons of plugins that don't really do anything particularly unique, but just take up time and attention. They're the goods and the bads. The other thing that I would feel remiss to not talk about is the kind of plugin culture or plugin lifestyle that has developed, and I've seen get worse over the last decade or so. These are things that just in the first half of today lobbed up in my Facebook and my YouTube travels. What you will encounter, and remember I talked about some bold claims, is particularly the word pro, giving the impression that there's only one way to be good enough. And so it leads manufacturers to make these bold claims and lean on the idea that, oh, well, you're not pro enough if you don't use our device. So you will find the word pro attached to all manner of things. In this case, we've got, and I'm not having a go at them because I understand their products to be pretty fine, but we've got the Echo Boy, the pro standard for Echo. They've just invented that idea that it's the pro standard for Echo. It's not a thing I've ever heard before, and besides, there's no such thing as a pro standard for Echo. You use whatever it makes Echo, and you make the most of it. So the idea that we're constantly being fed that, oh, well, I can't be pro, which is a meaningless word, we cannot be pro until we've bought this thing. You'll also see a lot of, if you have this, suddenly you'll get so much more creative option. So lots of bundling. You know, we'll sell you these 3 products and suddenly you'll have everything you need to do something or other. Yeah, please resist this, because it's just going to lead you to a lot of frustration, because the thing is, you need to find your sound. The plugin companies don't deliver you your sound, and nor should they, because if the plugin company delivers you your sound, guess what? You've got exactly the same sound as everybody else who bought that very same plugin. Focus more on finding your own sound rather than being sort of drawn into this is the only way you will sound or appear pro if you use our thing. And I'm not having a go at any particular company, it's just these conveniently, or for them inconveniently, came across my thing this morning. The other one is that you will find there's this eternal lure, especially in the free end, where many of the plugins are really barely fit for purpose. You'll find this eternal lure that you need more plugins. Don't. What you need to do is learn the plugins that you've got, and you're better off to have one compressor, one EQ that you know super well, than to have 28 compressors and 28 EQs that you think are able to do things that your one EQ or one compressor couldn't do. Because chances are your one EQ and one compressor, if they're halfway decent, can do everything that all those other things do and save you a lot of time and trouble. You will find that eternal lure, coupled with the grand promises, to be a massive waste of time, money, and build a lot of frustration as you feel like you're not good enough because you've actually wasted a lot of your time chasing plugins rather than learning what you've got. The other one that's related to this, and Dan Worrell's the guy who's managed to come across my radar today, and in no way am I saying that this is a negative on Dan Worrell, because he's a guy worth watching because he knows what he's talking about. But this particular thing that we see here, what's wrong with stock plugins? Most of the time, nothing. A few companies, yeah, but most of the time, nothing. Most of the time, there's nothing wrong with a plugin at all, so long as it's doing the job. Some don't do the job, but, that's for you to work out. But if you're getting the job done and you've learnt it and you're getting the most out of it, there is nothing wrong with your plugin. This comes down to building technical fears. You use your ears and you'll know when you've got it right, and you should equally know when you've got it wrong. Taking a reasonably skilled engineer who's learned his tools and replacing his mix plugins that are technically wrong based on something that somebody's obsessing about, and then give him technically perfect things, he's still going to end up with the same result. But to get there, he may actually have to do twice the amount of work, because the oddities that these supposedly technical wrong plugins bring, or style of, the way physics works, will be something that he's factored in when he's doing it. So please just be very cautious of this plugin lifestyle that you can fall into, because it will sap what you're really here for, which is to make great music. So you're going to need a host. A host is commonly called a digital audio workstation. In the old days, it was called a sequencer. That's the environment that you need in which you pull your plugin in to do something or other. Your host will most likely these days be a 64-bit application, unless you're running a very old computer and very old software, in which case it's probably a 32-bit application. If it's a 32-bit application, it will only run 32-bit VST. Now, you need to be sure of that when you're downloading a VST, that it gives you a 32-bit VST option. And if it's that older software, it probably only runs VST2, so you'll need to make sure that it's not a VST3. If you've got remotely modern software, and please, you really should, then it will be a 64-bit application, which means that it must have a 64-bit plugin to work. That does rule out quite a lot of older plugins, including all of my older plugins, like my Synth Studio Pack stuff. But rather than worrying about that, I've simply moved forward, because times change. There's very little out there in the 32-bit world that hasn't been done and done better in the 64-bit world. If you absolutely must, there are DAWs like Reaper that will run 32s and 64s and what have you. But where possible, try and at least run a 64-bit plugin. The reason being is they're just simply better. There's nothing against using a 32-bit plugin, but if you've got the choice, use a 64-bit. Focus on 64 bits, because 32 bits is a dying format. VST 3 is the newest version, and it's a bit of a watershed moment, and it is meaning that VST2s or VST 2.4s are on the way out. But it's going to be a while before they really get phased out. At the moment, Reason as a DAW, as a host, will host a 64-bit VST 2.4. It will not host a VST 3. Slight irony is that if you get the VST Rack plugin, that is a VST 3. VST3 is the new SDK format, and it has certain technical advantages, which I'm not going to get into, because as I've said to you in the last few reviews, I'm not a technical focused kind of a guy. I'm here to make music, not to make technicalities. But it does allow certain more things to be done, and once it becomes across the board that it's everywhere, yeah, that'll be nice. But just, again, take great care that the VST you download suits the needs of your host. So your host is where you put your VST. Nice and simple. We'll look at some of the technical capabilities, and then I'll start to show you through some of them. One of the things that people really liked about VST, but I barely use, is the ability for patches. Patches being presets that will do a certain thing. Like in this setting, we've got certain we've got sounds already pre-built. I pre-built those when I made the device because I know that when you sell it, people want a few basic sounds to go with. Now, some synths really put a lot of time and energy into having vast numbers of presets because they know that a lot of users just don't make their own sounds and want presets. That's great. Other developers like myself are not focused on presets, so we'll just make the device, and it's up to you how you use it. There is, within the VST format, the option to save and load extra preset banks. So you've got not only the option for the ones that came in the box when you got the plugin, but the ability to save off. So I can save off my patch, which obviously I need to call a clever patch. I can save off a whole bank of patches, which is however big the bank is allowed. Normally that'll be between 1 and 128 patches, or you can save off just the program. So you've got to be very aware. Am I just saving the individual patch, or am I saving the whole bank? And if I save that, I could then come back in later, press my open button, and go find it. The way that behaves is to some extent VST specific and host specific, but that ability to save and load patches is a big deal for a lot of people and is relatively important. What I'll do is I shall work you through a couple of examples. Within the VST format, we have two main streams of how a VST is built. It can be built as an effect, which is where they started, which is an effect being a thing that modifies the sound that comes into it. That's really important. So examples of effects are delay lines, choruses, reverbs, pitch shifters, phasers, distortion, anything that alters a sound coming into it. The other stream is the instrument. Now, technically, they're actually called a VSTi, and they identified themselves differently to the host because particularly in the old days, a host would treat a VST effect and a VSTi differently. We will start by looking at an instrument. This is the one you heard before. Yes, boys and girls, this is one I made earlier. So this gives me the option to be able to show you the guts, which gives you some idea of how these things work. This is what Duo Line, that synthesizer, looks like on the inside. I built this in Synth, which is a really powerful program that supplies tons of modules, and then there are third-party modules as well, and you can put those modules together to create your architecture for your device. So in this case, we've got the MIDI coming in, and that MIDI is being sent off to control pitching of oscillators, the 3 oscillator pitches. It's controlling the amplifier and filter envelopes, all this kind of stuff. Oscillators make their noise, they get modified by all kinds of things like LFOs, they're fed through the filter which gets modified by its envelope and LFOs, and then ultimately it all gets turned into audio and spat at. And that's what an instrument does. How it's created all comes down to this. Now this is a very visual format. The other way that VST are made is with hard code. So using a coding language, whether that be a Lua scripting or a Juice or a C++, whatever. It's sort of pretty full-on code. And so then the developer, the person who's coding it, has to be able to see in their head what this block of code would kind of look like in terms of architecture. So they would probably have comments in their code saying, this bit's the filtery bit, which is the equivalent of, oh look, there's my filter, there. The other one that we've got here is modulating delay. This is the inside of that delay unit. You can see here, this is the original skin, that we can see the sound coming in from the outside world, which is relative to your host. It goes through this process, it switches, does it go here, does it go there, and then it goes through soft distortion, which is our drive here, the filters, high and low pass, the delay, which is here, the doohickeys and stuff that modify that ultimately spat out the other end, which is to go to a sound at device here. So that's the inside of what a plugin looks like. If it's made in a visual environment like Synth Edit, it'll look like this. If it's made in a hard code environment, it'll look like strings of semi-English, semi-gibberish, which is code. In this section, I will show you through, in use, an instrument and effect, and how the pairing of them and bringing in other things really makes this format come alive and become so versatile and so powerful. So we start with an instrument. Not much of an exciting sound. Let's go do something interesting. Let's actually make sort of an organ. Yeah, not very interesting. Actually, we will undo that, and this is a good thing. A good VST responds to Control Z commands. Basic oscillator. Let's have another one. And a third one, because why wouldn't we? Just turn that down. Great! We can add a little bit of vibrato. Take some of the tops off it because it's a little aggressive. Obviously, the sky's the limit based on the architecture of your instrument and your own abilities, your own learning and understanding. But there's a basic sound. That can work in a mix just fine. It's then what we can do with that next. Let's add a little bit of... Nice. So there's my sound. We'll put him aside for now. This is where it starts to get really interesting and a lot of fun, or potentially a bottomless pit. Be aware. This is the improved skin on the device I just showed you. So adding this echo or delay takes a very flat sound and suddenly we've got a lot more movement. So notice how that's you can use those filters. Notice how the sound now every time it goes around. Not only does it get quieter, but it's getting duller. We can set our LFO to stereo. So that's adding a lot of movement. We're getting some nice crunchiness in that drive at the beginning, and then the filters are sort of stopping that from getting out of control. We can add a little bit of offset. And in this case, this is a really interesting thing that I designed this to do. This is one of the features that you don't see a lot on VST, but you can do. You've got sub-ads. So what I'm doing here is I'm breaking out of this box. I'm actually sending the output of this device to another device, in this case, a rack extension. It's another type of plugin. The way that that's done is going to vary on your host. Some hosts make this sort of modular usage very easy. Some make it really rather difficult. Because I've built this with subarts and the VST SDK has the option for subarts, then I can take the audio out, send it to a pitch shifter, bring it back in. Now in this case, what's happening is that the audio is going out before it's even hit the drive, and then coming back in again, and then going back out again. So every time, that's one. Every time it goes round, it goes through this next process. So that's called breaking out. We could make that so it becomes a pretty extreme sort of a chorus. So what I'm showing you there is that through what's called chaining plugins, which we can either just chain one into another, as we've taken our synthesizer and put it straight through the delay unit. In this case, our chain has used a breakout to add in another thing. We could then take this and put it through another device, a reverb or a chorus or whatever we've got in our arsenal, and it'll do its thing. That's where the real power, the real magic of plugins comes, because in this case I've used two of my own, so you sort of think, oh, well, they're going to match each other. But I've used a third from a completely different developer, and it still matches. So the ability to pull in different ideas, different types of thinking, different features from different places and put them all together into your own thing is where the VST plugin idea has really not revolutionized music. If anything, it's probably had a bad effect on music because it's made it too easy to get a result. But it has democratized music in the sense that anyone can do it. I can sit here on my computer, I could download a free DAW like Cakewalk by BandLab and download free plugins and make music. That's kind of a great thing. It's not like in the old days where you actually had to pay $7 to buy a plastic recorder. These days you can do a lot. Just don't get caught in the whole plugin and DAW lifestyle where you have all that power and deliver nothing. So overview again, we've had a look at, very briefly what a plugin is, what it can do for you, and how broad a spectrum there is out there. We've also looked at some of the downsides. So yes, we've got a very versatile standardized format within the plugin, the VST in particular, and that's led to a huge range of available plugins and a generally vibrant marketplace that has encouraged innovation. The downside being that some developers have not followed the software development kit rules as well as they could and should, and you can get some pretty crashy plugins or plugins that work in one environment but not in another. As people will argue as to whether that's the manufacturer of the host or the manufacturer of the plugin, but I think the plugin developers need to be a little bit more responsible at times. And equally, some plugin developers need to be a little bit more honest and not be focusing so much on making a Me Too offer or an offer that's probably Me Too, but they've overhyped by saying, oh, it's analog something or other, when really it isn't. Not that you can have analog in a digital environment. This is not technically possible because none of these things are real. They're all ones and zeros artfully lined up. But Just there can be times where there's a little too much fibbing, which leads people into more of that negative side of DAW lifestyle of being stuck in feeling like, oh, well, I need a more pro thing. You don't need a more pro thing. Many of my paid mixes are centered around this guy and his brothers and sisters, which are variants of this thing. Some people go, oh, you'd never use a synthetic made thing because they're garbage, you need a pro, this, that, and the other. And really, they just need to get their hands out of their pants. What I'll say is, before you go believing them, say, okay, Mr. Opinionated, let me go have a look at your work, what you've done. If it turns out they've done wonderful work, they have a right to an opinion. But if it turns out they've really not done any work at all, they're caught in the DAW lifestyle, and they're obsessing about proness and technical flaws rather than just getting on and getting stuff done. VST is a tool. It's a platform of tools that give you a lot of options and allow you to really explore a lot of creativity, but just don't let them become a purpose unto themselves. If you have any questions, not about specific software, please, because that's not really the idea here, but about understanding how the format goes, ask them down below, and when I become aware of them, I'll try and pop on over to give you a reasonable, workable answer. This is Benedict for Higher Hertz. If you want to stay connected and also get advised of the extra material that comes out as it comes out from us, then please pop on over to higherhertz.com, sign yourself on up. You have a great day now.